This week I had the great pleasure of speaking with Anthony James, who is the host of the Regen Narration Podcast, which really focuses on the regeneration of life on this planet. It was a great opportunity for two meta-nodes to have a meta-discussion about what I and Anthony see from across the range of people that we talk to in our respective podcasts. Again, we looked at systems and those that are serving and those that are not serving us. And Anthony talks about how development means a period of unravelling first, the gentle stripping of old frameworks, and how to be solid in that, how to be solid in the wilderness within. He also shares this beautiful story from Archie Rose about the elders that are sitting around the campfire waiting for us to come home, and that has significant meaning throughout this conversation. We also talked about the need to tend to conditions in which, rather than solutions, dissolutions come about. Again, this idea of unraveling. So rather than trying to unravel, just tending to the conditions that allow that to happen. This was a fantastically delicate but powerful and strong conversation. There's a lot of sense of humour, particularly listen out for Anthony talking about lasting change. That comes up to a giggle a number of times. There's so much more in this, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. So enjoy, Anthony. Hello and welcome back to WA Real. I'm your host, Bryn Edwards. Today I have the great pleasure of speaking to fellow podcaster Anthony James. Anthony, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Bryn. It's very good of you to have me. Thanks.
Well, you have me here at your kitchen table.
Indeed, welcome.
Indeed. So as I said, fellow podcaster, you've been producing the Regeneration Podcast for a few years. I was particularly interested and excited to talk to you because I'm big into sort of meta-analysis, and I find that for those that have been in the podcast game for a while and are quite focused, and probably focused in a way that's investigatory and it's linked to learning and things like that, as opposed to just doing it for a marketing commercial front, of which there's many. You then become almost like a meta node because you get to dive into all these different people, and you've had some really cool people on your podcast, ranging from big names like Zach Bush and Tyson Yonkaporta and Nora Bateson. They're the three that stood out to me personally, which says a lot about me. So yeah, I was really excited to get the opportunity for almost like one meta node to have a chat with another meta node, so we can have a meta discussion.
Look out.
Indeed. So we spoke recently and I asked you what was going on, and one of the things you were talking about is almost like constant evolution and transformation that's going on for you at the moment. I think that's a good place to start. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, it probably is a good place to start because wherever you are, there's obviously a context to it, and that's part of the meta thing, isn't it? Really being able to, whatever you're looking at, be able to look at what's shaped it and what's given rise to it. And so what's giving rise to this conversation, or part of what's giving rise to this conversation, at least this party of it, is particularly intense time around Dad's passing a couple of months ago, and with that, I was on the one level, the ongoing process with the podcast, which similarly I just feel incredibly grateful for, in terms of being in that position you describe, and speaking with these people who perhaps otherwise I wouldn't get to speak with, and with the sort of an open end and with the license to be open. And so you know this very well. It's. I mean, I didn't necessarily think this right through at the outset. It's quite.
You never do.
No, and probably shouldn't either.
Yeah,
but that's a whole other
unfold.
We could talk about that. Yeah. Probably key to all the best things in my life. actually, is that. But yeah, it's turned into this extraordinary gift and a bit like an intensive course all the time. In the best possible way. I love it. But it does mean then that it does feel like I'm really shifting and growing in myriad ways, I guess quicker and more profoundly than I would have otherwise. So match that with this acute experience of Dad's passing, and then I felt like, I guess again, consistent with everything we're talking about, we're going to talk about, they couldn't be held apart.
Yes.
So the first podcast for this year, inevitably a little delayed, had to infuse this experience. And so I ended up doing a monologue of sorts for the first time in my podcasting experience, and really shared some of the meta, some of the systemic aspects of a man's dying that in some ways are sort of liberating and in other ways are systemically devastating. Like the way the system's working, that's terrible. It's not working at all, which of course isn't a secret to most Australians at the moment because it's all over the news, the way the aged care system works. But I sort of drew threads then through other systems and then the culture and the way we set these things up. And so I guess, for me it's a doubly intensive time of where mortality and generational shift is very present. And that's part of then, I guess, perhaps what other people have experienced. Is it standard? I don't know.
Yeah.
I expect it probably is, that if you're open to it anyway, that when a parent passes, you feel a bit of a chunk in the cogs. It just goes boom, and I certainly feel that sense of stepping up or needing to step up. It's my time to step up and take more responsibility. And when I say that, I mean for people and place / planet, like step up in your custodianship.
Become a grown-up.
Yeah. Well, another level of, isn't it? So it's not elder yet.
Yeah.
But it's not. And grown up, I like to think that, my rite of passage or whatever, that I have to self-navigate a little early. But that's another story.
Yeah.
We may or may not touch on that was a while ago. So at this point in my 40s, it just means another.
Yes.
Within that spectrum, another shift. So yes, that's a bit of the maelstrom that I'm swimming in at the minute, and it has been a bit sort of orienting, where otherwise I might have a little more control on it. But with the death of Dad, it's been and the sort of harrowing nature of it, it's been a bit. I've had to look for the reins at times. But here we are, and I feel blessed, and it's good to be talking about it.
So because it's very easy when you talk to all these great people and you have these top quality conversations, and I find that each one leaves a little imprint upon you, and then, as you said, that then gathers a momentum which accelerates this exponential growth. And then there can be this hubris that comes in, which is like, oh wow, because you can feel the growth. You're like, oh, I'm obviously going somewhere. But then life can come in, like with your father or something else, and just take that apart.
Totally, and good.
Yes.
Hey, because if you were to boil down our malaise and our opportunities, they can come down to a few qualities, and hubris is amongst the ones that are our undoing, and humility is amongst the ones that are the way out or the way in. So good that it does that. I mean, I often think the same thing when machinery breaks down. As much as, I don't know, it happened the other day, something happened, it was a total, that's right, important email correspondence with someone in Melbourne who I was hoping for something from. And I, a couple of weeks, she's normally bang on to it. So a couple of weeks go by, and I think, well, geez, that's unusual. Maybe something's wrong. Are you okay, Rara? And she said, yeah, I'm okay. Just didn't get your first email, then got an auto email that you didn't even set up. This from a year ago or something, and that wasn't even the date you sent. The one you did send, complete, machinery boggle up.
Yeah.
And it was just another one of those moments where you go, inconvenient, yes, but on the bigger picture level, reassuring that the machines haven't got control.
Yeah.
But nor have we by extension.
Yeah.
We are not living a mechanized existence as much as we might try at times. I find that that's actually reaffirming of our humanness and nature's wonders and what's beyond us, that there's the great mystery is alive,
Yeah.
So long may those jagged edges that can puncture any sense of, having control of things, long may they live.
Yeah, because, and what comes up as I was listening to you there was, so I went to a English boys boarding school, which was hugely regimented, right? And the days I loved the most were snow days, because they just threw everything into disruption. All of a sudden, all of a sudden you weren't in the playground, you were doing this, maybe your mum and dad came and picked you up a day earlier, or if it was close to the end of the week, in the first school I went to, or there would always be disruption. And then coming out of, because I felt, maybe not the mechanisation as in the machine, as in
literal,
machine, but as in the behavioural mechanisation. Right. And so that had the spanner thrown into it.
Yeah.
And I just loved it. And then leaving school, we would get snow days when it would disrupt work and all of this sort of stuff. And in England, and it was like everybody would be like, I can't get in the car and I can't do this and this. And there's always this felt sadness for me, usually round about the 2nd or 3rd or 4th of January, when everyone's had 10 days off work and they've just chilled out, or they're doing Christmas and what have you. But there's this incredible weighty sadness to me that everybody just seems to forget about everything and put the clothes on and go back to work and do the mechanisation. So I guess that's a long-winded way of saying that's one of the things I really, really enjoyed about last year.
Well, exactly what I was
that
thinking.
All of a sudden, it illuminated all of this, and it held us in a place where we couldn't snap back for a period of time. This time last year, we were just, oh shit, I've got to stay at home for a while, and everyone's scrabbling to try and grab a piece of normality that they knew, although that wasn't going to happen. And so it's at those moments. The number of people I've listened to that say, oh, I had a 2-week holiday on Rottnest, and then the last week I was really remembering about how I used to like painting and I really wanted to own a coffee shop, but then forgot about it and went back to work on the terrace. And it's messing with those systems.
Yeah, right on.
And I guess one of the questions I was keen to investigate with you is we have these disruptions. Like we have them personally, whether it's passing of a loved one or snow day or something like that. But for somebody who's delved into the systems that we have, what do you think it's going to take us to really and snap open some awakening?
The short answer. Do you believe me that I'd have one?
Nope.
The short answer, which is no answer at all, that's how I can have a short answer, is that it's up to us.
Yes.
You make me think of a couple of things. Because COVID was precisely where my mind went as well.
Yeah.
And of course, around the world, they're still gripped by it. We can forget that here at times, particularly in WA. So
we're locked in, not locked down.
Yeah, right on. Yeah, exactly. And we're in a big state and we're on a big island, so you can. But anyway, arguably some of the best stuff has come from reconnecting with yourself and with place and your family and all that sort of stuff. There's no doubt. And And I still, as much as it might feel like a cliche now, as we've snapped back in many regards, I mean, traffic in Perth now is 20% more than it was pre-pandemic, for example. And that's clearly a whole bunch of different reasons. Repatriation, whatever fears around PT, public transport, etc. But for whatever snapback, it's still true to say, I think, that people are reflecting or have reflected. They've been it has shifted things. And certainly some of the sites I saw in lockdown around here of families around coastal area walking, running at the beach was just beautiful. I mean, dads with daughters that I'd never seen before and everywhere. Wonderful. It was a little snapshot of some of the beauty that is on offer if we can say, actually, some of what we're actually aiming for in life to achieve a development that's worth the name is we actually have achieved it. We're there and we can afford now to smell the roses a bit.
Yeah.
And we don't need to get jobs and growth going again, we can settle in. In fact, there's a lovely expat Aussie in the UK wrote a book and was on the podcast because we hosted an event here in Perth with her, Catherine Trebek, The Economics of Arrival. Making yourself at home when you've developed.
Yes.
What are you growing for anymore?
Yeah.
Aside from, staying on top of the heap and being able to quash people in war, but that's not development. So what are we actually trying to achieve here?
Yes.
Anyway, so the other thing, just to tie up before I throw it back to you, is you triggered a thought about the brilliant researcher Rebecca Solnit,
Right.
who sort of became globally famous around the Hurricane Katrina.
Yes.
But she's done a stack of work before and since around what those sorts of smacks will produce, because the whole thing around Hurricane Katrina, the shocking news stories were about, black communities running rampant riots and looting and rah-rah.
Yeah.
And the reality, I mean, there were those bits on top, sure,
Yeah.
but the reality underneath on the ground was extraordinary resilience and connection and cooperation and saving each other because the state had really abandoned them in many respects.
Yes.
So a heck of a story. But basically she's then extrapolated a thread from all these different instances of disaster where, somewhat paradoxically, but really not at all if you understand the dynamics that she's revealing, is that when mundane life is punctured by these things, it brings people alive.
Yes.
How's that? It brings people alive. It triggers a more acute and immediate sense of, who can I help? What can I do? I can do this. I'm being useful. I mean, etc., etc. And I think there's something massive for us in that. It's to not seek, actually, to be too comfortable, but to seek to be alive. And an old mate and mentor of mine used to call that saving the wilderness within, and I sort of carry that because he was very close to me, and I really liked it, as a sort of a self-confessed greenie. But he said, look, I'm interested in those forests over there in Victoria. It was over in Gippsland or whatever, but mostly, and at the base level, like those forests will depend on the wilderness within you. And will you leave this room after being with me a little wilder, a little less predictable, a little less mechanized, a little less mundane? And that was success to him. And I still carry that torch. I reckon if we're aiming for anything, it's life, isn't it? So,
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It is, I did read not so long ago that a disaster is described as one that breaks the everyday. Operating.
Well, you know what's interesting? What does development mean? Like, let's just think about the word, which I did a bit 20 years ago when I was studying it in overseas and whatever. I'm like, so if envelop is to wrap up. If you look up the dictionary, develop.
Yeah.
Part of it will tell you it's unravelling.
Yes.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
But we've got this whole sort of other I think, psyche around development, but maybe the actual meaning of development's not so bad for us.
Then the unravelling, this then becomes, the challenge there is, and this thing I've been exploring recently, is managing your own nervous system to be able to stay open during an unravelling, which creates quite an existential challenge.
No doubt.
Because if something important that you use to make sense of the world is unravelling, that can cause systemic overwhelm and paralysis, or just, we're not having this, it's too much. But if you can stay open to that, then you start to tap into a more continually existing part of yourself that doesn't mind, and you separate out. So, I've been playing it. We were talking about boundaries beforehand, and I found one of the things interesting is that as things come from being a subject to an object for me, subject means that they have me. So like when I was 18, my emotions had me frequently. But now I can delineate some, and now they become objects, and I can see them and I have them. Still coming out, have a go at me from time to time, but you see my point. So as sense making starts to become more of an object of curiosity for me and wonder, then I can hold on to still a bit that's possibly beyond identity, and then open up to unravelling.
Yeah, no, right on. You reminded me of, in the beautiful conversation I had with Charlie Massey, sort of regenerative agriculture elder of sorts in Australia right now, and we talked about this a bit, and it brought to mind a story that I was lucky enough to experience after my mentor, as he was, as it turns out, nearing the end of his life, but at that stage it was just, I was succeeding him into the teaching of the postgraduate sustainability stuff at university. Yeah. And in doing that, for a little while after he died as well, we'd have students from sort of 25 to 75 even at times. Yeah, it was quite wonderful. And perhaps the oldest one ever, and I think he was the 70 mark, he ends up saying something like, I feel like I've lost my language. I can't even talk anymore because what I'm instantly hearing is wrong. Like, it's not wrong, but it's an older frame of understanding that he's left. Yes. But hasn't established another one yet.
Got the vernacular and the semantics to describe that.
Exactly. And to describe the next frame that ideally you would then continue to evolve. You wouldn't. Yeah. I mean, the whole idea of lasting change. How do I create lasting change so that, you still hear it a little bit in sustainability, and it's sort of, no, actually you want change, the art of change. Yes. Not a lasting change. Of course, they're talking about not snapping back to old ways, but it's still not. That's not the goal. The goal is the art of change. I often thought it would be changeability, but I've since liked more what this bloke in my life, Frank, titled his book Responsibility, in 2 words. Just how to respond to life and get better at it. Anyway, so I said this to Charlie, and he was like, from all his studies in the cognitive end of the spectrum, explaining why farmers change or don't, or want to change or can't, or and that most have changed through trauma. The old thing being punctured, having the frame punctured before you can move it. Not everyone, but certainly most. He sort of put it about 60%, and he just felt like that experience with that older guy, that he articulated it beautifully. Yes. The challenge of it, and I guess then as people like me would be, pinpricks, would be punctures. Poke. That's right. That your responsibility then is to make sure you're not stripping anyone bare or throwing them over a cliff edge or something.
In what regard?
Well, that you would bring about the stripping of their old frame,
Yes.
where they've got a base
Yes.
for whatever.
So it's not overwhelm.
And that you then so successfully take them out of that, and that they are left feeling completely exposed, overwhelmed, don't know how to handle it, don't even know where to go. I mean, these are processes where they're done well, where they have significant supportive structures around them.
Yeah.
Whether they be, I mean, in regenerative agriculture, you might talk about an RCS Australia, a unit in Yeppoon in Queensland. Over 30 years have developed these peer networks where people carry each other from the courses they do, which break the world open.
Yes.
And then you're supported in a peer sense, communities of support or whatever name you want to give them. But whatever it is that you need that infrastructure lest you actually make things worse for individuals, but then by extension, a lot of us, in ways that you well described when you asked the question. So yeah, it's really important, I think. And sure, you get better at it with that support.
Yeah.
And then it's a virtuous cycle.
Well, you recognise the stages, so
Yeah.
you don't freak out during it.
Exactly.
Because I find there is this. I'm almost noticing now. I know when there's a new level of something moving from subject to object, because I can feel the edges of it. It's causing me frustration, and I can't articulate it.
Yeah.
And that's that transitional moment, and then all of a sudden, you read a book or have a conversation with somebody, and someone will say something. You're like, and it's just like, whoa, yeah.
But doesn't it feel good?
That
by the way,
articulates this. Brilliant. Oh, now I can put my arms around it. Not because then it makes me feel safe, because then we're back to comfort. But then I'm like, now I can do something with it.
Yeah, well said. No, I think that's it. Yeah, another guest recently, actually.
And you have to be sensitive with people if you're sort of helping them along. That, what is it? I just came across the concept of optimal conflict, which has you at the edge of your sense making, but is not overwhelming, but also has the door closed behind you so you can't duck back out again.
The devil you know. Yeah, totally.
You're in it now.
No, that's right. But geez, this is uplifting stuff when you get a hold of it. I mean, it's partly why people would have beautifully got in touch with me in the last couple of months after Dad's passing and after the podcast I put out, which referred to it, and how you going, basically, and
wow,
and I'm able to. Thankfully, it never felt like the floor had dropped from under me. In the same way you're describing, really. So basically, it left me in a transformative space, needing to give it the time and all that sort of stuff, and brain wiring around something different so that I couldn't do normal sort of mundane functional things.
Yeah, and bypass it.
Yeah, that's right. The sort of energy was going to another realm. But and the way I ended up describing it for people was that I'm solid in it. That's just a way of saying what you're saying, that once you get practiced enough, it's the wilderness within. It's a way that you can be alive and not need to have a lock on stuff. And it actually is a spur rather than a ball and chain or a thorn in your side.
Yes.
It's actually a spur, a way of being that is uplifting and makes your days quite wonderful. And that's even in mourning. I would say that. It felt like a blessing. I mean, given that it happens, right? This is life.
You can't sweep it under the carpet.
Yeah. No, and why would you? There's another level of responsibility. There's another level of living out everything that you might value, as well as plenty of stuff that you don't. Like, don't get me wrong. We had our journey. Don't worry about that. And it related to some of your boarding school stuff that you spoke about in an earlier podcast, because he was in a boarding school at age 4 and effectively still in it to 26, because he followed the line and became a Christian brother. So I was then brought up with that sort of, even though he'd left, that sort of boarding school thing So plenty of stuff, but it feels ultimately rich if you can be navigating it in this way that's amenable to movement at a deeper level. Yeah.
I like what you've said twice about being all right with the wilderness within, because so part of where the focus for me inside and outside of the podcast has been around complexity and looking at emerging systems, and it's been quite a journey for me to, I think I mentioned it in the previous podcast, it's been quite a journey for me to even acknowledge that that's a capacity and capability that I have. I think I said before, in a large chunk of my management consulting career, I'd come home thinking I didn't get it. Because everybody was like, I don't understand what you're saying. You go, right. Yeah. And then I realised that I've been speaking French to German people, to use an analogy. Yeah. But the wilderness within, I've been playing with the concept that to understand and be okay with the complexity of the interrelatedness of everything that goes on outside, I have to be okay with the complexity and the interrelatedness of everything inside. I think someone pointed out, Plato referred to this as that anagogue or something, whereby the more I'm all right with being with the complexity and the contradictory nature and all of it of being a human, then the deeper I can look into the outside world, and then I extract more sense of meaning from it, which then gives me a greater sense of being all right, and the two just start to become deeper, and you see further into the world and further into yourself.
Beautiful.
Have you encountered a similar thing?
Totally, you've nailed it.
Because I'm aware of you've probably gone to the heart of this quicker with your podcast. I've sort of arrived at it. I've been through the journey of listening to lots of stories and then also moving towards it.
There you go.
Does that make sense?
No, it's really interesting. Yeah. I find, I mean, everyone's story of how they get to these insights is bloody fascinating, isn't it? And it's for the very reason you've just articulated. It's bloody uplifting. Like, it's seriously, I mean, my life is a lot better now than it used to be without it. Oh, the damage, I look back and think, the damage that I'd take back if I could. And I mean, mostly to other people, but certainly to myself. But yes, to be alive to this dynamic is bloody beautiful, because, I mean, and to think we're barely scratching the surface, right?
Yeah.
That it's a bloody amazing world out there.
It is.
In there.
Oh, and in there. And, the more I see into one, the more I see outside. So then I start looking at nature. I start looking at, the deeper aspects of agriculture through my work with vegetables when I'm not doing
yes, of course,
podcasting.
Yes.
And but then also macroeconomics, and then politics and democracy.
Yeah.
And I start looking at things and they all start to illuminate.
Yeah. No, that's right. It's a really lovely way to put it. And then, of course, you're connecting with other people in that same way. And then one thing can lead to another, as it does. This is the way it works.
Yeah.
And not that it's all roses, because that's not the way it works.
That's certainly the case.
But I guess, like I was articulating with Dad's passing, you've just got, you're back in. All right, a little story that I'll offer this moment then, by virtue of Archie Rose, the Aboriginal incredible singer-songwriter over many a decade, and certainly a cherished soul, I've never met him, just at a distance. Seen him perform, certainly, and I saw him perform in Freo a couple of years ago. I think it was a couple of years ago. Maybe it was last year. I can't remember the whole warp of time around COVID, but he pretty much closed this beautiful gig in Freo with a story about an old fire pit that had been found near his country in Vic. And the short of it is, I mean, I'll be paraphrasing probably very loosely, but the short of it is that this fire pit was discovered and sort of excavated, and there was this extremely strong sense that the elders were still there around the fire as he relayed this story, waiting for us to come home. Every time I even think of it, it still gives me chills. And at that moment, I was like, oh. And so if the world, whatever you want to call it, is waiting, and the elders and the universe, God even, if you like, are waiting for us to come home, then of course it's going to feel bloody awesome to be on your way.
Yes.
And to think that there is a welcoming, a nurturing, a community, like a communing waiting for us, available to us in the world, not the world's out to get you. I better get on top of this rat race.
Yes.
Or world's out to get me. I better put the wall up or some, all these things that go the other way, which is what we've
Independent Republic
done.
of one.
Exactly. And then by extension of Australia and, the subs we need to buy or whatever for $50 billion, whatever crazy thing it is. I mean, by extension this and by extension that, right? We could go on. That's our estrangement from home. But that actually there's the prism on the world that is more akin to reality, as far as we can perceive it, is that there is a nurturing there and a home there. And any surprise, I mean, that's what we came out of. So the fact we've gone away, sure, maybe we needed to cut our teeth, on some experiments, but, we can drift back now. And I wonder it would feel good.
I'm just feeling into that.
Oh, me too. Yeah.
I've found myself in the last couple of years being drawn more to walking amongst trees and things like that. I live in Bicton, so it's a lovely little walk along Blackwall Reach, and there's a particular area along there where I challenge myself not to be in my thoughts, but be with the trees, because it's easy to go and walk anywhere and just be thinking about stuff. And several times whilst doing that, I then find myself just stopping and looking and feeling into it all, or presencing into it all. And then you get a sense of there is something holding and waiting for us, despite the fact we're being petulant youth destroying the sandpit.
No, right on. Yeah, I just actually watched a documentary that premiered at the Transitions Film Festival online this year. I actually ran that festival here in Perth and hoped it would sort of kick on, but things have got away in the way of events. But they streamed it online from its HQ over East, and one of the films this year was The Hidden Life of Trees, like after the book, the guy who wrote the book, Peter Voleben. And it's an extraordinary documentary. It's an extraordinary book, but I hadn't read it. I'm sort of meaning to. And even another friend, Monica Galliano, wrote a book. I can't remember the title of it, on plant consciousness. I mean, this is now a very well recognised thing in Western science and becoming more commonly understood in Western culture. That the trees commune, feel, communicate amongst themselves, but B, their lives are not sustained in themselves or by direct photosynthesis, as we did conceptualize all this in the West, rather through the intricate networks, mycelial networks in the soil. And if you took out the bits in between, we were talking before about systems thinking, that actually refers to between the systems,
Yes.
rather than the systems themselves, that there's a representation of it right there. The tree would be nothing without the bits in between. And in that sense, the consciousness in trees, which we haven't been brought up with, let's say that, isn't just in that tree, but then by extension, not just in you, not just in me, and not just, you know, so relative to that tree, it's the same bloody network.
It is.
That's connecting us to that tree out there, and you to those trees there, as you to me, and to everything else. How wonderful is that? Takes the pressure off, don't you reckon?
It does.
You don't have to be a hero.
Yes. Don't have to run around fixing
But also, you can't run away.
Yes, you can't.
You're still in it.
Yeah.
Home
like
is
that,
waiting for you.
bit like that optimal conflict,
Yes,
isn't it?
right
The
on,
door's
right on.
closed behind you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got to face it, and you got to grow up. You know, all these themes.
Yeah.
They're good metaphors for it.
And you can try and sweep it under the carpet.
No.
Not for very
But ultimately, then why would you then? So this is the thing. Once you break through, but you know, I remember too well being a very depressed, probably angry first and then depressed younger guy, oblivious to, utterly oblivious to all this because of the upbringing, nature of the upbringing. I'd seen the lack of sense.
When you say nature of upbringing, you mean?
So the way
The way.
that I was brought up.
Right.
Yep. So church as it was happening didn't make much sense.
Yeah.
Family as it was happening didn't make much sense, which of course I've reconciled since, because how is a kid in boarding school at age 4 ever going to know what family is? Like, it's impossible, let alone how brutal boarding school was.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, this is said with a lot of understanding and compassion now. But at the time it was just a dark pit, because you knew that didn't make sense. What the hell does? So, but, you know, here I am today, and I can well remember when it wasn't so clear or inviting.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. That felt alone.
Yes.
Couldn't find home.
And I've been exploring a documentary series by a creator that I really enjoy, Adam Curtis. Yeah. And he's put one out recently called Can't Get You Out of My Head. Have you been through it?
No, I've just heard it.
There's a real... It extends the things that were on in the Century of the Self about... It's almost as if I think we might have gone just that bit too far with our focus on individualism.
to say the least. But that's the invitation, right? We can change.
But then, well, here we go. Just as the subject becomes the object, so you can look at it, and we have probably evolved out. I'm not going to say out of nature, because we never evolved out of it, but our perspective has evolved out of it into this individual who feels somewhat fanny slapped if my coffee's not warm enough. Right.
I can top you up with hot water.
No, that's fine. That's the best thing that came to mind at that point. Yet we are still part of the subject and the object. Was it the concept have been introduced to recently? We are actually part of the transject.
There you go.
So and it's looking at that the how far we've focused on individualism and everything else that's come with that, consumerism, even democracy,
totally,
compared to our collective focus, but then even our integrated focus.
That's right. But you know, by the same token, and I think this is important too, it's not like I don't want to be seen as cursing everything that's gone before.
No.
I mean, your podcasts have well shown as so much else has, and my life is a case in point as well, that what was so tough earlier has opened the door to the gifts today.
Yeah.
So it's not that you want to be free of that stuff, or then deny it, or just think that was rubbish, shouldn't happen again for anyone else, Same with society though. So our individualistic, fervour for an epoch or an era brought things that I appreciate.
Yeah. There's a lot more sensitivity in the world.
Exactly.
There's a lot greater sense of trauma inflicted upon us.
Yes.
And, inequality.
Yes. But then there's also the romance of the troubadours. It's from the same tradition.
Exactly.
There's the opportunity I had to, having been saved from the pit of despair by luck, and ideally that wouldn't be left to luck, but then having been saved from the pit of despair, having the lights come back on, seeing possibility, to be able to then follow that of my own accord, which, arguably I'm still doing. That there's a freedom in that I value, and I like to think it's bringing value to the whole. So it's just to say that, it's not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, I guess, is probably the throwaway, isn't it?
Because that's the easy thing. I mean, we get. Let's take a great example. You could have been pulled into going to church all the time, and then you get to that point of like, church is shit, I'm throwing it out. But there's a lot of cool things to go with the process of going to church. Community, connection with something bigger than yourself.
Right on. And that others, because I don't find that in the church now. I mean, probably too burned, Certainly in spiritual traditions, and when I say that, I will still communicate with people in the Catholic Church I was brought up with, and other churches and other Eastern spiritual traditions and so forth. So I sort of, feel connected with them all in a way today. But I guess the most important thing related to what you're saying is that there's a respect for people who choose one.
Yes.
So it doesn't diminish that respect or the value or the meaning in that for them. And I still like to think for all of us, like if the dogmatism and the I guess that's what it is, isn't it? When you think yours is the way and someone else's isn't. If we could leave that,
Yes.
But then that's still the same mindset.
Soften that out a bit.
Individualistic mindset taken to a tribe, basically. This is my tribe's actually the one. Yours isn't. Again, just dropping that and coming back home.
Coming back home.
Then whichever home you set up for yourself, beautiful. Make it nice. I'd love to visit on occasion. Do you want to top up, by the way?
I would love a top up, thank you. One of the things that I alluded to earlier on about speaking French to German people as I was coming into my own understanding of how I was seeing things from a integrative, systematic perspective. It's kind of easy when you do something like a podcast, because you meet one person who then introduces you to another person, and you have one conversation that leads to another conversation. And then without realising it, despite the fact you've done this brave thing to break out of your echo chamber, you now find yourself in another echo chamber, and you don't even realise it, because the thing that...
Oh, well, that's it. Lasting change. You don't want lasting change.
Lasting change. I love that.
Don't do it.
You don't want lasting change. So I guess where I'm getting to is that, so it would be easy for me at times to go, no, everyone's switching on to this stuff, it's systematic.
Yeah.
But it's not the case.
Yep.
But is it the case?
Maybe. I mean, this is the value of, as Tyson Yunkaporta puts it, he sort of just quips against that Tim Leary saying, find the others, like just stick to the others. And he means others, not the ones like you. And that's where he says he spends most of his time now. Make sure you're with people not like you.
Yes.
And that's the wilderness right there.
And that means breaking out of the algorithm that's sending
Oh,
you the
mate.
stuff that you enjoy.
Underline bold. We could follow that thread a little more if you want to, but for the moment, your podcast is called WA Real, and really, that it's a good tradition of that podcasting line that you've come out of, that you've applied it here. For me, and for the learning that I've accrued in more recent times, it's to get real. And when I say get real, I mean as much. And the podcast I host really took legs because of this, where a few years ago, my family and I decided to go around the country and get to know our place, this country, much more than we had. I mean, I'd travelled, but I'd not gone out to meet people who were out on the country wherever I went. Farmers, pastoralists, First Nations, business people, writers, sociologists, famous, not famous, elders, young people, like the gamut, and really get to know our country and the people on it. And that feeds the best of what you're talking about, I think. Where then you're not in your own bubble. You're not even exposed to the algorithms for a start.
Yeah.
And then you are with people in communities, whoever they are. Bad luck if you can't find anyone like you. Bad luck. But again, such richness. And what I found out there all the more was the richness that's turning things around, turning problems around, like regenerating landscapes and First Nations bringing their communities back home. Let's say, Archie's words, and creating their own paths and telling their own stories anew. And we're now the beneficiaries of being able to hear those stories the way they, not through colonial lenses. Which also then tell us about the land in turn. I mean, there's the whole picture of why country, land, real life, trees is so important, and the people that tend the places are so important to everything, and why, my previous work, which was perhaps more focused in an urban setting, wasn't enough. In the words of Alan Savory, there can be no sustainable business if agriculture is not sustainable, for example. And in WA, where the majority of our space is agriculture of one form or another, let alone then the reserves that abut those spaces, you've got a landscape out there that's in extremely poor condition, and that's in us, the so-called developed country.
Yeah.
That needs people back on country to be caring for it. Where it's happening and working is to behold. It's incredible and it's beautiful, and it's part of communities where it's full of trial and tribulation. So there's your way in to connect to what people are grappling with, and to a picture of the world that's not going to be so slanted in one particular way, be it exciting or not. Even it's the disastrous bloody news you get, it's not slanted that way either. Just the closer we can get to real life and the people in it, the better. I think that's a key aspect to what we're or key part of the invitation. Let's put it that way.
I think I was asked a long time ago, what does the real mean?
Yeah.
In WA Real, and my response was, there's nothing more real than an ending. And often what I end up talking to people about is the ending of a story, or the ending of a way of thinking. or being. And so what I got from listening to you there was almost like these layers of stuff are ending by the pursuit of going to talk to other people, and that then they are now starting to understand their responsibility for the land and tending to the land. And like you said, there is no business if there is no sustainable agriculture. And it's slowly but surely the ending of those stories that took us away from that, took us off on a game of hide and seek with ourselves. And yeah, I think that I think pennies just dropped for me there in that. That's very much what I pursue.
Yeah, really interesting. Yeah. And you know, there's so many ways that everything we've talked about here is just constant ending.
Yeah.
And constant beginnings. And great. Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. And at the macro level as well, it can be good. Like, this could be really good to let this thing that's overcooked just end.
Yeah.
Yeah. And rebirth into something else. Yeah. It's the invitation again. Yeah. And
rebirth.
Well, that's it.
I think
Renaissance.
The worry or the concern that I have is that in that, you know, for me it feels like bigger systems are showing themselves to be creaking now. You know, let's have a chat about national debt levels.
Yeah.
Let's have a chat about, you know, what's going on in the bond market and what that'll do to inflation, and then the debt levels and etc. And let's talk about the fact, you know, we could talk about the fact that Western Australia's just voted itself into a dictatorship.
But I wouldn't say that, by the way.
No. But
an outright majority, certainly. Which has its...
That's the lens,
definitely,
right?
Yeah.
I'm not being all revolution, I'm just observatory.
Yes.
I've stumped myself now. What was it?
That's right. All right, given we've stumped it, it'll come back to you. Let me just comment on the democracy dictatorship thing.
Yeah.
So... you've got it.
As these things come to their second law of thermodynamics, closed systems will always entropy after a period of time.
Yes.
You know, sometimes you don't have to do anything; they'll do it in and of themselves.
Yes.
But then we get back to the nervous system example that I gave you earlier on. Is that can be quite confronting.
Yeah.
So then what do we want to do when things are confronting and they're out of control? We want to regain control because that will abate our nervous system. So then we go and create let's not create, let's manufacture something, as opposed to, you mentioned rebirth, or allow something to emerge.
Yeah, no, really important. So,
and that's such a fine point that a lot of people just...
Well, let's make it less fine.
Yeah.
Look, this is great. This gives me license to say.
Yeah.
The word solutions.
Yeah. Gives you the shits.
I'm so backwards in coming forwards. I'm just going to use this particular moment because it's arrived there. It's immersed in it to just solutions. I'm so gentle on it usually because it's people trying to be positive, and that's awesome. And there are ways to regenerate life on the planet and in ourselves. It's happening everywhere. The opportunity is for more of us to jump in on it. There's no question of those things, but they're not solutions. And I say that because it's akin to the linearized, mechanistic Western Enlightenment understanding of the world, where it's the fix, problem, fix, solution. So what if it's more about the interconnected, in between, in which you create conditions that then, from which emerge, I mean, this is all the frame you're bringing up, from which emerge just better outcomes.
Yes.
But you're tending conditions. You're not saying, I'm going to do this to end up with that. Because you don't know. That's not the way life works. It's not the way the world works.
It's like, I haven't come here today, I haven't come here with like a bajillion questions. I've come here with an opener. Yeah. We'll see where it goes.
We'll see where it goes. Yeah. And so what if we get more comfortable with dissolutions? Where literally...
Dissolutions.
You set conditions to dissolve the problems because you're going to create conditions that are generative of more like where we want to go together. But so it's a massive thing, but we don't have to make too fine a point of it, I don't think. It's actually just not the way the world works, and Tyson will slam this down, say, "Oh, you're a bloody idiot," he'll say. It's not the way the world works. So let's that's true, that's in a sense what we're trying to depart from. What we're trying to learn was some of the problem with where we went as a Western culture.
Yes.
We need to grow up from, transcend, take with us, sure, have it in the kit.
Yeah. But we still want to take things like penicillin and the ability to bolt my leg together if I snap it into pieces.
Yeah, well said, yep. And then have those mechanistic things available, solutions available to us.
Correct.
But understand that's not how the world works as a whole. It's certainly not what's going to prevent you going into hospitals and other institutions in the first place.
No.
Creating healthy environments and homes that make you healthier by definition, so you don't need healthcare systems. I mean, these are the things.
Yeah.
You dissolve the need for the stuff that looks like we need more funding for in many cases.
Yes.
Just stop. Just get rid of it. Just stop causing the problem. Take the cause away.
Correct.
As my old mentor used to say. So yeah, in that sense, we can make it a really quite a forceful point that's what we're trying to depart from. We're trying to get to the in-between and the conditions base out of which healthier, more prosperous, regenerating life kicks back in. Its own forces kick back in and we're part of the thing again, and we don't have to worry about how do we fertilise this bloody paddock because it's dead.
Yeah.
That it actually does the work for us in many respects.
Yeah.
Again, like it used to. Yeah. And there's a metaphor, I reckon, for everything.
Yeah.
That's life, so of course it's a metaphor for everything.
I think that was one of the most confusing moments for me when I started a bit of work into horticulture, to realise that most growers were growing vegetables and not cultivating land upon which vegetables were growing.
Beautiful. Yeah, great.
And I was like, but surely, and then finding out that some crops would deplete a land in 5 years' time, and I was like, well, what are you going to do in 5 years' time? And it's like, I'll worry about that. I'll worry about that when I get there.
Yeah, that's
it's
right.
like, no, that's not a solution.
Yeah.
I think in what we were just talking about, though, this is one of the things I've been wrestling to even describe and articulate, is that our sort of definition of an expert is someone who's reduced something.
Yeah.
Right down. Whether because they've studied it or whether they've done that to be perceived as an expert, whatever.
It is a word, isn't it?
It is a word. Yeah. It is a word. And we could talk.
I don't use it.
Yeah, we could use expert for a long time. But anyway, you get these almost reduced nodes of information.
Yes.
Nodes of reduced information, right? Which we perceive to be an expert because you've gone really deep into this thing. I think we need to recognise that there is also the connector expert. So that we can pull a bunch of reduce, he's an expert on this and this and this and this. Yet these guys here are experts at weaving that together and seeing, oh, there's a bit there and there's a bit there and there's a bit there and there's a bit there. I've got a podcast coming up in a couple of weeks' time with a guy from Seattle who's leading edge trainer of Olympic athletes, and he's been the biggest advocate of looking at measuring our heart rate variability for 20 odd years now. But I want to talk to him about higher heart rate variability means that I'm engaging my parasympathetic nervous system more, which means that I'm more open to stuff. So it's not just about, can I maximize my recovery so I can press more in the gym, so to speak. It's, can I do this so over here in life
Yeah, nice.
I'm more open and I can be in these, you know. So it's that sort of, so it's the role of the meta.
Well, it is, exactly.
Isn't it?
Yeah,
Where it's kind of half, well, where we started.
Yeah, well, that's right. No, that's exactly what it is.
Yeah,
And,
but seeing that
beautiful.
as an exploit.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And Nora Basin's got some bloody awesome stories. There's this one particular story which I actually can't I have to get it back on the podcast to just tell this one story,
Right.
which I can't remember the details of. It was basically a clinic in Italy that called her up and said, we've been practicing your systems thinking, your dad's work and rah-rah. And she's like, oh, not another one that's going to think they've got it, but they don't got it,
Yeah.
And you got to goes there half with a cringe and think, what am I going to say when I realise they're doing something different? And because, it's in a lab and everything. And but they'd actually... they'd nailed it in a way that she'd rarely seen, and it was with a particular treatment, and if I could remember it, it'd really bring that thing home. But
Yeah.
you may even talk to her before I do about it and get the story more widely told. But basically, they found a way of treating serious physical injury, which then related to neurological, because it was like either movement of limbs or sensory abilities of limbs that were shot. And we're finding a way to trigger healing properties in the body that overcame these extraordinary things by going nowhere near the limb in question.
Yes.
Yeah. So that was the broad punchline to it.
Yeah.
And it's the same with landscapes and people and like all the issues we're facing. So it's not, climate needs renewables. I mean, yes, it does.
Yeah.
But it's not the
A
fix.
equals B.
No, it's not. And in fact, renewables could take us straight over the cliff twice as fast, because we'll go like gangbusters to create renewables and keep our fossil fuels, and that's sort of the pattern we've been on. It might be starting to change now, hopefully, but it needs to change. We need to keep a holistic perspective to be able to, create the conditions for life's self-regulating systems to kick back in.
Yes.
And be part of that family again. Yeah.
Where in Western Australia are you seeing the leading edge of that thinking?
Everywhere. This is the thing. Like once
Right.
you open the bloody
Yeah.
can, look at the earthworms come out. Mate, it's been incredible. I mean, this is what I found myself in, and how the podcast is sort of, I'm saying to someone, maybe even a guest last year, it's become its own thing. Like now it's a thing, and I follow it.
It's a trail of inquiry that you're a passenger on.
And now it's emergent, right?
Yeah.
Like in that language, and I'm a conduit. I mean, this is the language you used to use as musos as well. Like,
Really?
You're channeling, and in fact, I remember one night still where a bloke, a bloke, you're a conduit, right, to stuff. You're not making the music. You're just a conduit to it. And geez, that felt good as a muso to actually understand that, because it really did, like it was transcendent. It was beautiful, rather than you just plucking some strings. And being in a band then, you really, and I remember watching a bass player in another band played out of his skin one night. It was like, whoa. We said to him afterwards, what's going on? He said, I don't know. I don't know. And even playing cricket, I remember I took a catch one time as a 16-year-old in cricket. I just felt the ball, and it sort of clapped my hand, but I didn't know what was going on. I couldn't have caught it if I was consciously in the moment. Like, just that conduit metaphor is actually quite a lovely and pretty accurate type of thing to consider, I reckon.
It is, and it A, knocks out the hubris, and B, takes out a lot of the anxiety as well.
Well, that's
the performance anxiety.
Exactly, right on. And that you don't go and force that performance. You don't go on stage and think, better start rocking it straight away. People
better get and then do it.
Or a podcast.
Yeah.
Better be done in 30 minutes.
So one of the lesser known things I've been pretty transparent on the podcast journey about different things that I've done in and around the podcast that's been provoked by it. But one of the lesser known things was I've actually had 2 channels on the podcast, right? And one of the ladies, when was it? 2018, for a bunch of reasons which I won't bore you with right now. I just felt urged. So she put a little advert up on her Facebook page, and I rang her up and went, right, let's learn how to do this. So I spent 6 weeks it was, went to her house every Thursday morning, I think it was, Wednesday afternoon, and we spent an hour and a half and just more of let go, be all right with channeling stuff. And you know, I didn't suddenly just become like the person who sits around the table who can, you know, bring Auntie Ethel in or something like that. It certainly wasn't that, and it certainly wasn't thought it was. Where you watch some of these, you go on YouTube and you can see who's the one, Abraham Hicks or someone like this is a lady who's made millions out of channeling stuff. But what I did notice was that I just started to trust myself more, and I allowed myself to do more, and the podcast started to change. That's when I started to move to, let's just see what's going to happen.
Interesting. Really good. Yeah, you
So it's allowing that emergent thing
to
arise.
And that's what's, to I guess to get back, to give you a bit more of a direct answer to your question about what stood out around WA. That's where things are happening that are standing out to me, whether they be a cattle station in the Kimberley that was a dust bowl, like forsaken, utterly abandoned. Southern part of Alquestra, which many people might know on the Gibb River Road. Massive, almost like the Disneyland. I don't know if that's unfair, but almost like the Disneyland of stations up in the Kimberley in Alquestra. And the southern part was sold off to this bloke or this family, budding family, and it was shot, like where there was water. I mean, there was still a bit, enough for them to go, we can do this, but pretty much a dust bowl. And to look at it now, wow. And not only that, but with methods now that are increasingly common around the country and around the world now, that holistic methods that are bringing country back in really, like, it's remarkable time. Not that rapidity would be the defining characteristic. I mean, it's just life coming back, but it's fast too as it happens. What do you know?
Yeah.
So that's pretty hopeful. And then whether it's down to, the restoration stuff happening down south with Gondwanaling, which was just on the Regeneration, where it's 1,000-kilometre stretch of country down south, so pretty much the south part of WA, massive sway of the country, where they're connecting farmers, miners, First Nations, investors, community groups, conservation groups, communities, funded philanthropists, like the whole kit, just again creating the conditions, linking up this whole sort of thing, out of which they're reconnecting landscapes, so they're not just sort of fragments of an old ecosystem, they're actually functioning ecosystems, inside of which we'd have farming happen where it should, in the way it should, and much better than it has been, going to salt and communities disappearing and so forth. So turning that around too, and again in remarkably short time in a way. And when you talk about turning around First Nations colonial relations in remarkably short time, isn't that an achievement in itself? Yes. And then of course what they're doing now with their recovered landscapes, and that they have control of those to be able to conduct their own education processes and enterprises out of, which is still seriously problematic with native title and so forth, that they can't do anything with their space because they don't own it in the way that we recognise, etc. So huge stuff happening in remarkably short timeframes on the back of trust, connection, reconnection, relationship, and I mean across the spectrum there, amongst people, across cultures, with landscapes, with animals, and just getting better at sensing the way forward, getting better at not reacting to triggers, whatever triggers they are, your own fears, someone's view on one particular thing, like just don't get taken away by that. stick together, be gentle, and it creates the space, it creates the conditions. So that's what stood out to me around WA, where the stuff that you'll see actually happening looks extraordinary, but in another respect is just life happening again.
Yes.
But in some ways extraordinary because of what
isn't black magic
done to the place. No, that's right. Very important point. Totally available to us all.
Yeah.
If we can just keep practicing that art, which is what I'm practicing. I mean, I know. Yeah. I mean, I'm right in there with everybody else, trying to figure it out and trying to do a better job at it. But I guess to touch off on something else you're alluding to earlier, the people who are playing more of that role includes people down at that unravelling project. It's a whole bunch of projects, really, but they're playing that overarching connector role. And arguably, folk like us are playing our little role amongst the team as well in those sorts of ways. And I know others are as well. They're not on a payroll of anyone in particular. They hope they're sort of working in an emerging livelihood in that sense. As the emerging economy, if you like, comes on as well. But just on that, by the way, we didn't even use the word economy before the Second World War. So I'd like to get back to society, actually, or something more like that. Just talk about what it is.
Yeah.
Not this abstraction of...
It's interesting, that.
Yeah, anyway.
We didn't use the word risk much until the 80s.
Bang. Yeah, nice point. So there's something there to keep us grounded in what is the real world that we are needing to reconnect with.
Separated.
Peel that back. And that's where the language is important. And of course, where languages, including First Nations, are so important, not just for them, but for us. Yeah. And what a beautiful opportunity to turn that around, that we would have still hundreds of languages available on this continent for all of us. Wow. I mean, pity we sort of, put such a dent in them. I mean, pity. Again, underlined. But where we go from today, and, some of the stuff happening down south on language reclamation, extraordinary. Kim Scott and the Wheelman Languages Project.
Right.
Oh, blow your mind. And what it's doing for communities then, in terms of not just their healing, but then their reconnection with country that may have had massacre on it or so forth.
Yeah.
Enabling them to reconnect with that country they haven't been able to do. I mean, again, I don't want to idealise it. I mean, imagine how fraught that is. It's processes on processes, but wow, at the same time...
But at least you're going there.
You're going there, and it's powerful, and it's going home. So you know it's the right direction. And that matters so much to all of us as we try and find our way, not only to that sort of, I guess, spirit camp sort of home, to use Tyson's language again, but to the literal sense of what does it mean to live in Australia, that Europeans and now obviously Asians and everybody else are trying to come to terms with.
Yeah.
This different continent that burns and now floods, like it's hasn't known for some time.
Do you think there's anything else we should talk about? Or
It feels like it. Feels like a good full circle.
It does, doesn't it?
Yes.
It does. So the last question I do ask all my guests is if we can, and it's the hypothetical question which I enjoy finishing on, so we could just chill everyone out to sit still for 5 or 10 minutes and consider one question which you upload into the collective consciousness. What would that be?
Yeah. Well, if we take this motif from Archie Rose, that the elders in the land is waiting for us to come home. The question would be for people, where would you go? And what would you do to tend that place? It's the question for me, anyway.
What would you do to tend for that place?
Care for country.
That's beautiful.
Because if there's one thing I'm quite sensitive about at the moment, is that it seems that we're pulled so much into the present that we're ignoring our past and have little vision of our future.
Mm.
There's more and more. So to consider where would you go and how would you tend it starts to paint that vision.
Right on. Yeah. Yep. And connect you to everything that's made that place. That old fire pit everywhere. Who knows how many tens of thousands of years ultimately that this particular landscape, let alone the billions that WA, the land, has existed. Billions we're standing on. What's crossed your front doorstep? My front doorstep. I'll put it. These are the. I mean, that's beautiful, isn't it? That you could be connected to that deep time, and to a vision of the future.
Yeah.
That's more of our making of in terms of what really counts, not just where we're getting taken by. Systems and lenses that really need to shift, but hanging on for their last moment in the sun or under clouds as they might be at the moment with federal politics, for example. But there's a beautiful thing on offer here.
There is.
Yeah.
I've really enjoyed this.
Me too, mate. Thanks for coming up.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
People want to find you?
Well, it's either regeneration.com, spelled Regen Narration as in story or changing the story, or wherever you find your podcasts, the Regeneration.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Bryn. Cheers, mate.
Cheers.
Beautiful.